Ready to go?
Let's roll.
All right. Welcome to Curious and Unqualified, a podcast about life in academia. I'm Eric Edlund, professor of physics.
I'm Jeremy Jimenez, professor in the Foundations and Social Advocacy Department, Education.
Well, welcome back to Season 2, hopefully this time in video. For those of you who are new to the show, I thought maybe we would start off and take a moment to explain what this show is about, what our goals are here. In terms of that, I thought we might just start with the title of the show, Curious and Unqualified. And I think that kind of represents our two goals is to, one, explore topics that we find curious or interesting. And two, it's kind of rooted in the belief that to have discussions, to converse with people, you shouldn't need to be an expert, right? We should be able to sit down and admit that we are unqualified about things, but still dig deep and challenge each other on.
And technically, we are all unqualified rank, is it?
Yeah, it's kind of a technicality of our administrative system in the college. We're got professors of unqualified rank, which whatever that means.
And so we try to have on a bunch of different guests from different fields across academia, student perspectives, faculty perspectives, staff, admin perspectives, and we'll have some more of those interviews this season as well. The
other point I wanted to make is that while we do get into politics in this show, I think the goal is not to be political. I don't think you and I are coming down on a side. I mean, we certainly have our personal beliefs and opinions about things. But this show is kind of apolitical in its origin. And I think that's an important thing to state up front.
Right. In part, the reason we launched this podcast is we noticed that there was a lot of self-censorship and overt censorship in higher education. And so we basically noticed there's a lot of topics that people who they feel they have a particular view, they can't say that and they shouldn't say that. They'll be judged by their colleagues, which is kind of interesting. Professors can take really strong, radical stance on things in social media, but then be very wary to even slightly diverge from what might be consensus opinions of higher education. So we basically had the idea to create a forum where we ourselves can express ideas that maybe others are reticent to express, as well as invite guests who might have such views as well.
And also towards that point, we've had conversations with a few guests now who have expressed an interest in possibly coming on anonymous, right? So we can
do voice distortion through our utilities here. We can work out something with the video or not do video recording of our guests.
Though I guess if we had any kind of limitations, we would want there to be at least some kind of openness
on the part of guests to not necessarily having their view changed, but to kind of be willing to learn. And like, for example, Nazis, I don't believe would ever have a place on this show. Though someone who might be very conservative right wing and might be called some people a Nazi, that's kind of a gray area. And that's a kind of a case by case basis.
Why don't we catch up? It's been a while. You were freshly off sabbatical, a year-long sabbatical, and I am, now about a month into my one-semester sabbatical. Tell us a little bit about your experience being on sabbatical and maybe what you accomplished and what you worked on.
Sabbatical was overall wonderful. So on the personal end, I'm on a quest, as you paid attention last season, to go to every country in the world. I'm getting pretty close to my goal, about a dozen countries left. And so I got to go to Libya, Lesotho, and Yemen here, Socotra Island, Yemen. Shout out, a beautiful, wonderful place. And so some personal travel. I also did some research. I did a lot of textbook research as a PhD student, so I kind of went back to that and looked at environmental indigenous issue textbooks. But the big study I did is I embedded myself with teachers in California who actually integrate ethnic studies with environmental studies and like ecological stewardship. And they do they're basically a lot of students who are at risk within the public school systems of the Bay Area, and they do really innovative programs that are both rigorous, because these teachers kind of recognize that a lot of teachers have given up on these students, and so they don't want to kind of just have them, an easy walk through high school. They want to make sure they actually have like a rigorous program, but they also do things that are meaningful, that like embedded in the community. The students actually learn how to identify invasive species, and they spend some days going out into the field to pull those species. So it's all about kind of like recognizing the relationship between their own community and like social forces that shape them, geological forces that shape them. And like, I am so, when you come in as a professor, you're kind of supposed to have a critical eye, but I really had struggled to criticize this program because I was just so like inspired by the wonderful work that they're doing in this program, which I hope, and the part of the reason for the research was to kind of like talk about it so that others who similarly feel it's important to both teach ethnic studies and environmental studies together, like a model for doing that. And there are some circumstances would make that uniquely more possible in San Francisco, and partially too because of the area. They have a lot of Californians got some of those beautiful natural sites, you can visit as part of that. But yeah, so that was a large part of sabbatical, was kind of like working with these teachers and like interviewing the students who graduated, who are currently in the program. And so, yeah. And then sabbatical, you also have a lot of time to just do side projects, side essays, other like, I'm organizing a conference on lost ancient wisdom and indigenous traditions. So like you have that kind of time to take on things like that. Yeah, I also experienced the pipes in my house freezing, and that was like a total disaster. I actually visited, I knocked at Eric's door. I think it was Christmas night. I was like there, he had his nice family dinner, like, hey, can I join here? Because the temperature in my house is 30 degrees. So yeah, but that's because I was partially away and the pipes froze while I was away. But yeah, so that, but overall, yeah, it was wonderful. And now I'm back, and it's really interesting. Like, I kind of forgot how exhausting being a professor is. And it's not even just physically exhausting. It's just like how many hours you actually spend doing something job related. Like, for me, even when I go for a walk, I do this like at least once a week. I like to do what I call my cemetery publication walks. And basically, I walk around the cemetery. I feel like the reminders of death kind of boost my productivity a little bit, to not slack off and get important things done I want in life. And so I just spend the hour thinking about what have I recently published, what's in the pipeline, what ideas I might have for future books or chapters or reviews, like who I might want to reach out to collaborate with, what data is getting stale and I want to jump in it. And like it's an enjoyable thing to think about, but I just think about like there's just so much of that, like from waking up to going to bed, there's almost no time off from this job, right? Especially, and again, it's a privilege to have spent so many hours at a job where a lot of those hours are things you really enjoy. You enjoy thinking about, working with, ways you can help students, et cetera, ways you can reform higher education. But it also just means you have so little time off, right? And you make excuses too. Like I think a lot of people, myself included, are going on somewhat of a news fast now, kind of like the hopelessness of all these horrible things happening to like consume less news. But then I'm like, well, but I need to be informed, right, if these issues come up in class. And so I force myself to read more news. And that's just, it's a way in which it's still technically like, obviously my job doesn't require me to, but it's a way I feel pressured I need to do that. And so, yeah, so just kind of like that daily grind of like 60, 70 hours a week while we're at the job during the semester. And then, of course, summers off and sabbaticals, you have the flip side where you get to really relax and think about things. And so, but yeah, so it's been a great time off. Everyone who has the privilege of having a sabbatical should take it for sure. And yeah, and I would say being back is also interesting. Even in that year I'm gone, like the AIification, right, of students, like how so many students are just pretty upfront. They use it. I mean, they kind of hesitate at first when they first come in class because they don't know your views on it, and so they don't want to like be accused of cheating if they use it. But like when you get time to know them and you communicate them, like, hey, I'm just really curious how often you use it. You find it, yeah, it's pretty much used across the board for so many things. And that's just a constant challenge, a way you have to reinvent your teaching and your lessons to kind of like, and one way is to kind of do more stuff in class to do. And for relevant for myself as a teacher of teachers, so much more of their job is oral communication. And so it's teaching, it's speaking and listening. And so, but so much of college is writing. And I think we're now at this kind of turning point where what we understood to be writing is being challenged as a discipline, because if so many students, and especially more serious year every year, if middle school students are like not even learning the basic foundations of writing because they're AIing it, what does that speak to the future? Well, one of the way I think of responding is there's many professors doing hard work to try to continue for writing to be relevant, but I'm also thinking, well, for my particular students, mostly teachers, it's actually more important that they learn how to communicate verbally and listen. And so I'm just rearranging my classes to be more of that and less of traditional academic writing.
One of my concerns with that approach would be that I feel like we're on a slippery slope here. And if what we're saying to the upcoming teachers is, look, it's okay, I know you're going to use AI, it then becomes a question of like, what values do they then pass on to the next generation? And like, maybe this is a problem that we just, there's no stopping, right? Like it's coming our way, and it would be useless to try to fight against this trend. On the other hand, I know in the sciences, I make a point of, despite I hate calculators. I know I've mentioned this before.
I believe I gave you an abacus.
And it's on my to-do list for my sabbatical project to learn how to use this abacus. I've started playing with it, but the eventual goal is to learn how to do things like calculate square roots on it, right? So a little bit more advanced stuff. But towards that point, I would love to, once I learn how to use an abacus, require an abacus as a course material, right? No TI-83, no computers. Like, seriously, let's just do the calculations by hand. I think there's a lot of value in this old school ways of approaching things. So I wonder the same thing with writing. Like, maybe we're actually, while it's inevitable that AI is going to change our world, maybe we're actually giving up something really valuable by not stressing this more.
Different professor. I think one of the values of a college education is you get a lot of different professor views and priorities in your class. And so I think students are exposed to the spectrum, all from let's completely use it, let's go all in, to I forbid it in my class, and I'm gonna manage between interviews. So my kind of view is to kind of really taking the longer view of two things. One, what we lost when we kind of stopped being oral cultures, right? Like, there's something we lost as far as our capacity for our culture to change to changing times and adapt. That is inherent to oral cultures. They're better suited to adapt to changing times than written cultures, which kind of often fixate on words as having supposed to have certain meaning, and even if they might change how they interpret the meaning over time, they still have these like fixed points of words over time that gets lost. So in one sense, I'm speaking to an earlier tradition that's been lost. And so I'm kind of like reviving this oral tradition deep in our species, 300,000 years old, that's been lost, knowing very few other professors are doing that. That's one niche I think I'm providing. But the other part of it being like, the AI thing isn't even so much that it's AI is here to stay, we all should use it. Like, me being an energy environmental doomer, like, I actually think its days are numbered, right? I think we're going to hit at some point in the decades ahead the energy wall of our ability to actually continue to use AI, and for all students have access to their own personal devices, et cetera. And so I'm even just thinking like a little bit further down the road, as we transition away from this cheap access to readily available energy, we won't be having much AI at all. And therefore, I'm thinking about the kind of skills going back to like when we don't even have any access to digital devices, or at least much less access, because the rare earth minerals, like your average laptop has something like 60 minerals in it, right? Like, when those supply chains break down and we can no longer make these readily available, I'm thinking about my teachers who in theory might be teaching for the next 40 years. They will be, in my view, starting to work through this transition.
Which is an interesting thing, though, to recognize or to think about the days of modernity as being numbered, and fairly low numbered, in your opinion. And yet, like, not pushing back against the AI. Because, I mean, it seems like the challenge here, or the potential difficulty, is that students and our student teachers develop such a dependency on it, because they use it so often, that when that falls away, they are left without means to actually provide for themselves, right? That they've become dependent upon this. And so I'm just surprised to hear you say, kind of embrace it.
I agree with you. I don't disagree that it's creating a very unhealthy dependence and brain rot, right? And so I do give cautions of my own views that this is a technology that like could easily lead to brain rot, no matter how much learning and years of experience you have, right? Because it just becomes easier and easier to outsource cognitive function to the AI. So I make that clear, but my view is sort of effectiveness, right? If across the board they are going to use it, and what a waste of my time to try to police that. And then also think about the biases involved of like accusing students who weren't using it, and just the time wasted with like plagiarism and issues with like sending them through the system. Like, it's such a time waste that maybe if we were a united front against it, like if there were institutions like ours that are like, we as a school are against this brain rot and we're not going to tolerate it, then it would kind of be like, okay, then it's kind of understood we're all on the same page. But if many professors are either going to encourage it, allow it, incorporate it, and a few people don't, I don't see the few people who resist it as being able to be a bulwark against it, other than like maybe in like individual mentor cases, like you have PhD students like, oh, like I'm gonna individually mentor you how to avoid that, etc. But yeah, so that's kind of, it's really more being about practical.
I get that. I don't want to be the academic honesty policeman.
And again, increasingly hard to even do it, right? Like, yeah, I
get that. Interesting that you mentioned how, some professors are embracing this to various extents. I was chatting with a student of mine last spring, a freshman student, and our students at our institution have to take 2 semesters of intro composition. And he was very dismayed, disappointed that AI was so embraced in his composition courses. It was kind of put front and center. They were encouraged to use it to write their essays, and
he's like,
I want to legitimately write my own stuff. I don't want to have AI crank out crap. And then their thing was like editing and commentary on the AI product. So it's interesting to see even among students that there's a divergence of opinion on this as well.
And I think every class does have a handful like that are like, oh, like I'm actively resisting it. And I think that's wonderful that there's a contingent that kind of wants to keep on, learn those skills themselves and not be like usurped by AI. But they certainly are a shrinking minority over time.
Those that do will stand out as having skills that other people do not.
I hope those skills are timeless. And I would hope governments and corporations value those skills. But all trends seem to be suggested the opposite, that they are not, critical thinking is not being very valued. And so again, I share with you a wish that those who want to learn those skills and develop those skills find an outlet for it. But I'm not sure the trajectory of the way the world's going, for a variety of reasons, that is necessarily going to be a guaranteed outlet for them, right? But like you said, if it's an increasingly small number, and society decides we do want and value that, then yeah, in that case, then they might find their career prospects brighten a little bit. But your sabbatical, yeah. So you've recently transitioned. So what do you got? What are your plans, and what do you hope to do for your sabbatical?
I'll make 2 comments about my sabbatical. First is that when I was thinking about sabbatical over the last few years, I had originally thought that I really wanted to take sabbatical in the fall because I really wanted to get back to Burning Man, and the only time I could do that, Burning Man basically overlaps with the first week of the semester. And so, I wouldn't want to miss teaching to go to Burning Man. That wouldn't be right. So I thought, okay, I could take sabbatical and then go to Burning Man. And then as the summer progressed and I was thinking about this after my sabbatical had been approved, I just feeling like, no, it's just not, it doesn't feel right this year.
And it turns out you dodged a bullet.
It was kind of, it was a mess out there. I have a good friend who went out there, and he swears it was still a good time, but I'm kind of skeptical. But the bigger point, though, is just that I realized that I am changing and I'm not who I thought I was, right? Which is interesting because it's not just in relation to Burning Man that this is, I'm recognizing this about myself. And I think part of that's just getting older. I would still love to go out in the desert and party for a week. I think that sounds great. And of course, there's great music and art, and I have friends that go out there, so it's a big social scene as well. But I just really appreciate peace and solitude and being at home and being with my family and sitting down in my office and doing work. I think the quiet life, the dedicated life it's much more enjoyable to me at this point.
Yeah, I would say I would notice maybe not as dramatic, but certainly a trajectory of my own life going the same way for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad I made the decision not to go this year for multiple reasons. And then the other thing that I'll say about sabbaticals, I think I'm playing it pretty well so far. As one of my sabbatical projects that I proposed was to write a paper in addition to a number of other things. But I worked on that paper over the summer and then submitted it on day 4 of my sabbatical. So
is this a Lagrange paper? Or?
It's the second Lagrange point paper. So that's out there being reviewed currently, and fingers crossed I'll hear back on that soon. But it's been nice, kind of like you were saying, having time to think about things, kind of walk and ponder, kind of explore the deep questions of life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah, increasingly higher education, so much of our day-to-day is taken up by the minute tasks, right? Forms this, forms for that, answering these emails, reforming this little curriculum there, and that, yeah, sabbatical is like one of the only times you kind of get that chance. Like, okay, in theory, you have the summers in between your teaching, but often you just your brain needs to relax.
We don't get vacation time in the year, so our vacation time comes in the summer, so we're catching up with family and friends And so the summer gets readily broken up into small pieces. So yeah, it's hard to do a lot of continuous work in the summer, at least for most people. Anyway, so things are going well so far. Maybe we should talk a little bit about the outline for season 2, kind of what we have in the works here.
Let's do it.
So our next episode is going to be talking to a Gen Z young male student, kind of to get the contrasting point of view from the conversation we had with 2 of your former students back in the spring. So that'll be our first episode. After that, we have
1 or 2 faculty from our own university, an administrator from another university, and we're going to also experiment with some new segments too. Maybe one more somewhat humor laden, we shall see around Halloween time. But basically keeping up with the theme of trying to be open to diverse views and let conversations take place that otherwise might be difficult to happen. And I can say, just being another thing I've noticed being back, and this is, I suspect, correlates to Trump winning a second term and things being particularly tough now towards things like DEI, etc. I do feel censorship was more often of conservative views beforehand. Professors who might have conservative predilections might be more likely in previous years to stay mum on that, or feel like they wouldn't be supported, or feel like if they say these things they could lose out on opportunities. And now it does seem to be happening more the other way. I only say it in terms of, I think of colleagues who might be more vocal about certain topics, especially in the DI realm. Not that they won't have those conversations, but they seem to be muted, in my impression. Again, having that kind of year away, so like it was more like a dramatic shift. Where I feel like I'm noticing that. And so this, whether this is a new normal or it's just like people navigating new norms of free speech now, from the left being more concerned. That's another theme that we'll be addressing throughout the semester.
My hope is that this doesn't set in and become the new normal, but that coming out of this, we can recognize that we were not really a marketplace of free ideas in the past, and that we need to be more welcoming of people. I mean, there was professors who were fired, canceled, shouted down just for expressing diverging views that were critical of DEI or conservative views, whatever. Like that is, to me, really horrid, for one. And 2, it's like people see that. The public sees that. You want to know why people don't like DEI? Is because people out there in the world see that you can't have legitimate conversations about DEI in the college environment.
By some, right?
By some. I'm not saying this is everyone, but like this happens. People see that professors have got fired or canceled, whatever. And I think it just smacks them as wrong. Like, this is not how it should be.
I think the reverse is happening, and so some would say that like some sort of correcting was necessary. But my fear is, in this new regime, is that now it's backed up by the force of the government. Right now, it's a situation where the government weighs in. For example, if the Trump administration is not happy with the way Columbia faculty express views on Gaza, they pull federal funding. They arrest students. They use the hammer of the Department of Justice to go after students that spoke freely. And in fact, one judge recently did actually speak against that, and it's not yet clear yet what will happen with that. But yeah, so I think we're seeing the reverse, right? But I guess I just want to make clear, I don't think they're exactly equal in that now it's backed up by government suppression as well, as opposed to before, where it was more like just cancel culture and, individuals lobbying to have someone removed.
And administrative pressure or lack of support on the administrative side for things like free speech, right? I mean, it was, institutional, but not at the level of the federal government. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of that, I think that also somewhat ties into another one of our guests or potential guests for this second season, which I'm sure some people are not going to like, but I think it's maybe an interesting and important conversation to have. One of our hopes is to have the students from our local chapter of the Turning Point organization on here to get their story. Especially in light of the Charlie Kirk assassination, I think they have an interesting perspective. They also have an interesting story leading up to the origin and acceptance of their group at the college.
Right, in which our college had almost briefly national focus, right, because of the lawsuit.
There was pushback from within the Student Government Association and maybe the administration, I'm not sure, to reject the club's application for recognition. And then that eventually got, through a long process, and I don't know the details on it, got kind of overturned or things changed. So anyway, there's a very interesting story there. And that ties into, of course, a lot of current events. We might also say, like, this is the third time that we've tried to record episode 1. And so the last time we were recording episode 1, the first time had technical issues. The second time had technical issues. And there was kind of an immediacy effect. We recorded a few weeks ago and we were talking about how Jimmy Kimmel was essentially deplatformed.
And just as we were about to consider posting it, just sort of found out that was reversed because of, I guess, probably in part of all the consumers who canceled their Disney Plus subscriptions. And so,
funny story about that. I had was a subscriber to Disney Plus because my family and I really like to watch the Star Wars series they've released. Some are really good, and some are really terrible on there. But the Andor series is the one I'm thinking of. Wonderful. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that one. But we'd had this for months, and then we got kind of made our way through all the Star Wars series, and we were going to cancel it.
Oh, as a result of the Kimmel thing, or
no, just because I just don't.
Saw all the shows
I saw all the shows I wanted to see, so there's no point in paying for it. So I was on my to-do list to cancel, and then it finally made it to the top of my to-do list on the Monday before he was reinstated. So I canceled the Disney subscription, but not out of any intention to contribute to this protest.
Oh, there was some there inside you. There was something.
I feel like the dude who's walking home from the grocery store with his bag of groceries and just ended up in the middle of a protest. It's like I had no intention of being there, but I'm happy to have contributed to that effort at the end. So we had Jimmy Kimmel deplatformed, and that started a large discussion about censorship. Again, coming back, also tying in with issues of federal influence, presidential influence in these matters. And maybe it's worth rehashing some of our thoughts we expressed before. I thought they were quite interesting, and I think you and I basically agree on this, that it's really important to, not only secure everyone's ability to speak their mind, in a reasonable way, and to secure that also within academic institutions, but comedy has a special place in our society, and it's under attack from multiple sides, right? There's all sorts of cancel culture stuff going on where, if you said stuff that's offensive, people tried to get you deplatformed. Dave Chappelle, for an example, Joe Rogan, happened all the time with various people. But kind of the point of comedy is that, in a sense, it is supposed to be offensive insofar as it's pushing the boundaries of what it's kind of testing our thoughts and feelings, right?
It's given a venue to have those conversations because it's deliberately provocative in ways that other forms of discourse, it's not forbidden to say those things. So it's kind of like we've created this like societal structure where you have more free speech than in most other realms of society.
And good comedy, in a way, should be a critique of society, pointing out things that we don't recognize about ourselves or about our neighbors.
Or we recognize about ourselves, but we don't want to say or acknowledge.
Very much, yeah, exactly. And so it should allow for introspection. And part of that, one of the risks of comedy is that it is offensive. And, the thing about comedy and a lot of free speech issues is if you don't like what you're hearing, don't listen to Jimmy Kimmel. Right? Like, there's a very easy answer to that. You don't have to tune into it.
Which is why I was so propping this time, because it wasn't like people were not giving the option to opt out because temporarily the government had weighed in to have him lose his job, right? And so it was not just a matter of people being like, I don't like that message, I'm not going to listen. It was the government actively shutting down the voice.
Yeah, so I think it's important to protect these, protect all of our free speech. But I think, comedians, in my mind, have a special place in society, and they're kind of exploring the frontiers, right, of what's acceptable or what's not acceptable.
Yeah, I think one way I've changed a lot with regard to self-censoring is Well, it's hard to tease out. So I know I'm saying much less on social media. It wasn't necessarily a response to Trump 2.0, just over the years for various reasons, less screen time, realizing that in many ways, social media is pushing you towards algorithms that kind of reinforce your own beliefs and that aren't challenged. People that you're trying to convince, if you're not really careful how you say it, you could actually trigger reactive attitudes, which make them double down on their view rather than actually be open to consider an alternate point of view. And just kind of like a dopamine rage fest of like likes and clicks and shares of like validating your tribe for whatever issues you stand. So I've generally been using it less overall, but now it's what's kind of flipped is. Now I actually feel like, you have an inclination to use this, but maybe I should also actively use it less anyway, because I'm reminded of several things. Like Facebook surprisingly was available when I visited Syria in 2011 under Assad, which was a very, totalitarian state. Not quite like North Korea, but, minders and all that. And I was kind of finding it surprising that you can periodically get on Facebook, and then what, some kind of suggested is like, oh, actually the government wants people on Facebook because they want to know who's organizing protests. They want people to out themselves. And so that's what I kind of think of like social media. How much of it is you just outing yourself, like to let you know that you're opposed to this or that, this policy, this government, and weigh that against the value of it that like your ideas are positively influencing. And when I think about how the way algorithms are set up such that you're very unlikely to shape the views of someone with views contrary to you, it seems like more what you're just doing is more digital dependence, more outing yourself to point of view. Now, I think there is value to not normalize self-censorship, right? Like I think it's important to periodically like state a claim like I am opposed to this and like not cower in fear. But just on a day-to-day basis, I wonder, and there's also the issue of like, activism getting diverted to social media, right? Like if you have some kind of outrage or something and you could type away something, maybe that diverts for more meaningful actions, like throwing a wrench in the system, right? Mass protests to like shut down an airport if you want to like draw attention to an issue, right? So it's hard to know how much of it is Trump 2.0 is making me decide to know. I think it's really all of these things, but it's a factor in me. And specifically, this came out mostly with Charlie Kirk, which is like, I don't think I have particularly radical or controversial things to say about this, but like, why even bother? Like, I'm weighing the pros and cons of like contributing to discussion, and the cons so outweigh the pros, especially because for people that I thought made comments that were really, even Jimmy Kimmel comments specifically, right? They seem to be more critical of Republicans than actually Charlie Kirk himself, right? And nor was it in any way like, praising or supporting the shooter, but just the fact that was said, it was like, yeah, you know what? I think increasingly I'm just going to opt out. And so maybe that's self-censoring. I don't know. It's hard for me to tease out what's self-censoring and what is just a broader commitment to just use social media less.
Certainly part of that could be self-censorship. I think it's also just a very reasonable thing not to get sucked into the swamp of social media. I mean, there's a lot of horrid stuff out there, and it's, like you're right. I mean, you can just get enraged by what you hear and see and go around and loot cycles on posting and reposting. It can be a big waste of time. On the flip side, I think as a consumer of social media, lately I've kind of switched to using Instagram. I think it's very interesting as a source. I wouldn't say for news, although you do, especially on international stuff, you sometimes get stuff coming in that doesn't make the headlines here. Yeah. So it's interesting in that sense.
Well, I think specifically with Gaza, I think TikTok was a major reason why a lot of young people took strong sides on Gaza, because they were getting access to what was happening in Gaza that really wasn't being covered at all by mainstream outlets, right? So I think, sometimes social media does sort of like fill a gap that's otherwise, not.
It can fill a gap there, and I think it's somewhat similar to what we were talking about before of the role of comedians in society. There are people on there who are expressing ideas, challenging the status quo on left, on the right, in divergent ways, right? You want to find somebody who is talking about Marxist philosophy, it'll be all over social media, right? You want to find someone who's talking about whatever, doomerism, you can find it on social media, right? So you can find these niche communities on there that that really, I think, have a wide diversity of perspectives. And so I think it's valuable insofar as that. I think, one has to be wary about getting sucked into it too much. And these algorithms are terrible. I mean, I'll admit, I think I have a little Instagram addiction problem. Like, it's kind of hard to put it down at times because the algorithm is so adaptive. I mean, they have absolutely hacked our brains. Yeah. And so it's interesting and kind of terrifying at the same time.
Well, YouTube's very similar too in that, like, I typically listen to YouTube when I'm like cleaning, right? I'm just something to kind of have play in the background. And then I finish cleaning the countertop, I finish cooking, I'm ready. But then another thing just kind of cues up. I'm like, oh, actually, that's pretty interesting, right? Yeah, it knows what you want to listen to, and then it's easy to just kind of like let that keep going. So I think, the key is social media does provide these niches that you otherwise might not have access to, which is not just about learning ideas, but like interacting with like a community. I think the key is the self-regulation, right? To kind of recognize whether it's a hard limit of like, I'm going to give myself 15 minutes and then hard cutoff, or I'm going to go into the point that I start find myself feeling rage, and that rarely does that rage have a positive outcome. I mean, I think there is a role for rage in social action, right? Like, you get so angry about something, it leads you to, but more often than not, it might get you to stop thinking more open about it, because you get kind of rage filtered into a particular interpretation of reality that, could be very problematic.
Where to from here?
So, you recently went to the vigil, right, at our campus, because our campus had a vigil for Charlie Kirk, and right. So, what was that like? What was the turnout? What was your overall sense of the event?
This last Monday, I went to an evening vigil for Charlie Kirk that was sponsored by our local Turning Point group and Bridge Cortland, which is kind of a left-leaning group that is meant to foster interpolitical conversations. I went there mainly with the intention of observing and wanting to talk to folks from, of various perspectives. And it was a well-organized event. There was, on the vigil side of things, at the beginning, probably somewhere close to 100 people. And then as time went on, maybe it ended around 150 people, I'm guessing, something like that. And across the street, there was a much smaller protest, probably at the beginning, maybe 10-ish people. And at the end, something like 15 or 20 people had gathered over on the other side. It was a very respectful event. There was a significant police presence there, and I talked to a fellow who kind of helped organize the event there, and he said, the police were flying drones over the building, right? So they're taking, I don't know, I guess that's probably now just standard protocol for events like this. And it was a mix of clearly students, and I noticed that the mayor of our town was there. There was some older folks there who, I don't know if they were retired professors or just community members. So clearly it was a diverse group of people. And the whole event, it went off without a hitch. There was no negative interactions between the protesters and the people attending the vigil. Some members from both Bridge Cortland and Turning Point got up and spoke, and their message was very simple, and it was very polite and respectful, just more or less stating that we need to kind of double down on our efforts to have conversation and to discuss topics that are difficult to discuss, and they hope this was kind of an opening for further conversation. Following the event, I went around and just spoke to people from both the side of the vigil and across the street, and spoke to the people on the protesters' side, just to get a sense of like why people were there and what they were feeling. And spoke to one fellow who was turned out he was a resident in the town. There with his daughter, and he said he's a Christian. He said he supported, I think his words were like 99.9% of what Kirk spoke about. So he was a very strong supporter. Spoke to a young woman who's a SUNY Cortland student in the School of Education, and she said she's a conservative student. She really likes what Kirk said. I asked her, does she as a young woman have any concern in particular about his messages on abortion? She said no, she kind of disagrees with him on those points, but that wasn't like a major issue for her. And I thought that was interesting, right? We hear a lot about how his views on abortion in particular, I think people on the left are like really riled up about that, are really heinous or horrendous. I don't know how people would want to characterize it. And I think it's interesting to see somebody who, as a young woman in the world, just chooses to ignore that part and kind of think about the other aspects of his messaging. On the protester side, I had a long conversation with I think a freshman student. No, I think now a sophomore student. And this person was very concerned, less so, I would say, my understanding of the conversation, less so about Charlie Kirk and Turning Point per se, and just more concerned about the general state of our society and where things are heading. And this was kind of reiterated by two other people I spoke to on that side, who one just said he's a nihilist. Like, he just thinks like the end is nigh and that we're heading for civil war. And so there's a lot of dark feelings, I'd say, according to my impression, especially on the protest side. And I think that probably is true kind of feelings on the left right now, that we are entering dark times.
I found a lot of the things that he said quite horrible at times, and but I would say his broader point that conservative views have been silenced and that there should be pushback against that is valid. Though, and I'm sure you agree with me on this, that the professor watch list is not a particularly good way to go about identifying professors who you might think are too liberal.
I would agree with that. And I was actually approached a couple of years ago by the fellow who now runs the club on campus, the faculty advisor, and he asked me, because we'd had very open kind of interdisciplinary conversations about things. And I think both felt that we need to have more political conversations on campus of diverse views. And so he came to me and asked if I wanted to be club advisor. And I told him, no, like, I don't have in principle an objection to working with Turning Point, but I really don't like the professor watch list thing. And I still feel that way, although I'll say this about that particular aspect of it. I think my view on that has changed a little bit, in the sense that taking a deep dive into the whole Charlie Kirk thing, I came away with the sense that part of what's going on is that there is a great sense of distrust of people, conservative thinking people, towards the left, and in particular academia. And that trust, you don't get trust easily. That's something you have to build with hard work and a very dedicated effort. Why that is the case is, I think, terribly complex, and I don't have the answers to that, and I don't want to try to answer that now. But given that there's a sense of lack of trust, I could understand, in a sense, why they would go down that path of putting up something like a professor watch list. Like, imagine for the moment the tables were turned, right? And that the academic institutions were dominated by conservative thinking, and leftist views were very much in the minority, and were even kind of forbidden in some sense, right? If out of that world, all of a sudden, people on the left started seeing the rise of views that they said were like racist, misogynistic, homophobic ideas that were being embedded into classes and were being propagated as really kind of terrible ills on society, I think it would be within the realm of reason for people on the left to like do something equivalent to a professor watch list, of saying, these are the people who are telling our students really terrible things. And that's just kind of a thought experiment. I could see that happening. And all I'm saying here is that I can see, in the world in which we are operating from a severe deficit of trust, it becomes a little bit more clear to me why these things happen. I was going to end with 2 points, and I think I'll toss in a third point here, which kind of relates to this, is that just kind of speaking of the transformations, getting back to like my realization about myself earlier and not wanting to go to Burning Man. I think I've had a lot of realizations about myself in the last couple months, in thinking about where I stand politically on things. And it was actually just last week, in between when we recorded our last attempt at this first intro episode and this recording, that I kind of came to the realization that I am no longer of the left. It was a couple years ago that I deregistered as a Democrat, and was independent, not Democrat, not Republican, but still considered myself of the left. And I think at this point, I feel like the way that people on the left think and talk about things is not how I think about things. And so 2 points here on this. The first is in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, there was a lot of talk about kind of giving him and his family space to grieve and to be respectful of that time. And for people on the right, I think that was an important moment, and that was really, there was a lot of really horrid stuff online, and it's just like that really turned me off. I mean, I know that's not everyone. I'm not intending to draw that comparison, but the point is this: is that the conversation that emerged on the right was that we should respect the dignity of his life as a human being, and recognize that he was a member of a community, that he was a father and a husband, and to recognize the humanity in this person. What bothered me about that was that while people were so willing to extend this sense of humanity to Charlie Kirk, I feel like that should be a general principle that we extend more broadly. And this is happening essentially simultaneous with a large number of deportations in which I would say people are being treated very inhumanely. And I would hope that out of these conversations and this recognition that this is something that we owe each other, that we would extend this sense of dignity to people, which isn't to say that you can't have an immigration system and you can't deport people. I think people on the left and the right would mostly agree that that's a thing that kind of needs to be done for a country. But that's different than how you go about doing it. And you can do that humanely and with dignity. And so by one hope, it's that that's part of the conversation that emerges out of this.
Yeah, like in general, if you would hope all of us share the values that what a horrible thing it is for children to lose their parents. And you should be able to extend that regardless of the person's political views, regardless of their migrant status and their citizenship and ethnic background, right? Like,
it's horrible to see these videos of a father driving home from work with his daughter in the back seat and he gets pulled out of the car with, imagine if you're that 3 or 4 year old girl in the back of the seat seeing daddy like pulled out of the car, dragged away, and maybe that's the last time you saw him for at least who knows how long. I mean, it's a terrible thing to do to a family. So I think we need to work better on that. And so the second point I want to make is, I guess, get a little bit more directed on to the other side here, which is that this whole language about just absolutely vilifying Charlie Kirk and dragging him through the mud, I found really off-putting. And look, I'm a free speech defender, right? Like if that's something that you want to say or someone else wants to say, that's fine. That's your view. But you have to recognize that saying that to many people is off-putting, right? And it felt so off-putting to me that it was kind of that and my thoughts related to this that really kind of pushed me to recognize that I am no longer on the left. Like, I don't want to associate with you on that view. Not you in particular. I love associating with you. I think there's a better way that we need to talk about each other when we disagree. And you can think his views were atrocious, that he was backwards, that he was ignorant, that he was naive. That's fine. You can think all those things. But if your go-to statement is that he was a horrible, terrible human being, you know what? You have just become Rush Limbaugh. He berated Democrats on the left for years as traitors to America, as communists, as feminazis, or like whatever, all this volatile language that he used, right? And it's so grossly alienating to anyone that hears that. People who use that same language about Charlie Kirk, I think alienated a large fraction of the people. And like, again, you can take that stance. If that's your principled position, that's fine. But at the very least, I would hope that people would be a little bit pragmatic and realize that in a time when the Democratic Party is already bleeding voters, it doesn't make any legitimate sense to push more people away, right? And to many people, like the 100 or 150 people I saw at the vigil earlier this week, he was a loving person who expressed their views better than they can themselves, right? And anyway, strategically, I find this whole thing disastrous for people on the left, or I imagine it's going to be disastrous in the next midterms. But who knows? I mean, we live in crazy times. But I think just at a deeper level, kind of getting back to the idea of humanity, we need to get back to the point where we can disagree with people on values without dragging them through the mud.
Right, and so similarly, even though I think one value of us as co-hosts is your views tend to lean more conservative, my views tend to lean more liberal.
I'll say more and more over time, right? Like, this is my recognition that I feel like I am moving more to the right. Although, I mean, I still admire views and perspectives on the left, and I do also on the right. So I'm in the middle gray area.
But agreeing your journey in the sense that, as I've talked about more in detail in the previous season, is I found myself very much alone on my views on COVID and how we should deal with COVID, with shutdowns and lockdowns and vaccine mandates. I was very much found myself more aligned to the Republican interpretation of public policy in that event, which was kind of interesting, because what I noticed is that because I shared views on things like ethnic studies and anti-racism with my colleagues, they would automatically assume I shared the Democratic view on COVID, right? And I had to like individually push back. And institutionally, I remember our union kept saying things about like, we as a faculty believe this. And I'm like, no. And I would be like, the thing you're specifically saying, I don't believe that. Like, I believe there should be diversity and and understanding people's individual circumstances. Like, for example, if someone believes they have health factors that put them more at risk, then yes, we should support ways in which they are not forced to come teach in person. But like a blanket statement that all of us support all these policies, right? I found myself alone there. So similarly, even though I am more likely to agree on a lot of the classic liberal issues, I also don't have that identity anymore, specifically because of my experience with COVID and the dangers of groupthink that I found, which I talked about last season. I'll just very briefly say here is that the demonization I remember of Muslims in the aftermath of September 11th seemed so much to me identical to the demonization of unvaccinated people during the COVID era, right? And it was that kind of like sensing that fear was the relationship between unquestioned fear and demonization, which is why I also no longer like associate with a particular political party or broad set of ideas.
Interesting. So COVID was kind of your transition point, turning point.
My turning point to, I guess, like a truly independent thinker, right? Even if I'll caucus in my country, I'll caucus with the Democrats more often than not.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sure that what I've said here probably rubs some people the wrong way, and you think that maybe we're even wrong or that I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jeremy. Kind of holding Charlie Kirk up in any reasonable light here, and that's fine. We can agree to disagree, but I'll also say this: if that's your view and you want to come on and have a discussion about it, let's do it. And again, we can do that anonymous if you want. It doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I get why people would want to speak anonymously in this time, especially people who are critical of views on the right. And look, I don't want to be a defender for Charlie Kirk and his views. His views are his and not mine. But I think, as I was trying to express earlier, I've come to some deeper understanding of why he became a phenomena and what he speaks to in American culture. And so I would be happy to discuss that.
Yeah, the point of this show is to kind of have these conversations with diverse views, but you individually can decide your own risk assessment of whether or not you want to tie your name to any particular view.
Well, we've gone on for quite a while. I think that was a pretty good range of topics for our intro there. So maybe we call it quits for the day.
That sounds like a plan, yeah. And thank you all for listening. We look forward to having you come back to us for our next episode.
Yeah, indeed. All right. See you next time.
Bye all.